Hello AVIA 350 class. I'm William Wallace. Welcome to my Capstone project. Here we're going to talk about alternate airport weather minimums, specifically talking about a particular flight with some specific scenarios and 1 nav and 2 nav weather minimum comparison. So let's dive into it. First off, we got our conditions of our flight, flying for Liberty Aviation Airlines. We are a CRJ2 slant A. A note about the slant A, that means we have DME and a mode C transponder, but we don't have GPS or it's not enabled. Something's inoperative. If we had GPS, it would be a slant G. So we can't do any GPS approaches for this scenario. A big thing to note, our flight director and autopilot are in-op, which means everything's going to be hand-flown. As far as the flight goes, there's a NOTAM. No glide slope available. It's out of service on ILS runway 22 right. So that approach can be used, but only as a localizer. This flight will be from Lynchburg to Little Rock. Our alternate will be Baton Rouge. We're going to be looking at all the approaches available for Baton Rouge and making sure we can use that as an alternate. A couple more things to note. Our approach category for the CRJ is approach category D. Our ETA will be 1800 Zulu. So let's see what we're going to be looking for. 5 things. First off, we're going to find the purpose, for the purpose of determining an IFR weather alternate airport. What is the forecast weather for Baton Rouge at our ETA? Secondly, what are the lowest legal 1 nav alternate weather minimums for Baton Rouge that we can use? Following that, what are the lowest legal 2 nav requirements? Both ceiling and visibility, we'll look at all of that. 4, comparing 1 nav and 2 nav minimums. Is it legal for us to use Baton Rouge as our alternate, and why or why not? And lastly, if that NOTAM for the glide slope wasn't affecting us, would that change anything? Could we still use Baton Rouge as an alternate even if everything was working right? So first off, for the purpose of determining a weather alternate airport, what is the forecast weather for Baton Rouge at our ETA of 1800 Zulu? So looking at the TAF here, at our ETA 1800 Zulu, we have a temporary forecast, which is showing 1 mile visibility, broken ceilings at 500 feet. If the decision is to go on this flight, we can look at exemption 3585, which would mean we go by the main body of this TAF forecast, which would say 6 mile visibility and scattered ceilings at 3,000 feet. Now, for the first alternate, 3585 says a conditional statement must be at or above half the alternate minimums visibility and ceilings. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to be comparing both, assuming this flight was conducted under 3585 or not conducted under 3585. We'll look at both outcomes. So here we have, straight from the Flight Operations Manual, the table for 1 nav and 2 nav. This table can be found on Chapter 4, page 1.7. So for both methods of determining alternates, we'll have to look at all of our approaches. But before we do that, let's look at 1 nav, 1 operational approach navigation facility. You add 400 feet, 1 statute mile visibility. For 2 nav, you need to have at least 2 operational navigation facilities on 2 different runways. So it could be the same runway like a 1.7 and a 3.5 with 2 different approaches, but if it's like 2 ILSs going to the same physical runway, they need to have different identifiers to be considered 2 different approaches. But anyways, for a 2 nav, we add 200 feet and half statute mile visibility. So let's go ahead and look at our approaches available to us. First off, we have RNAV, 4 left, 13, 12, 22 right, and 3-1. Put a big red X over that. If you remember, our CRJ is a slant A. We don't have a slant G, so we need to assume our GPS is inoperative. Next up, we got ILS or localizer runway 13. Now, I put a little red X there. You'll take a note on that 1. Flight director and autopilot are inoperative on our flight today, so we can't pay attention to that note with the lower visibility. And just remember, we are approach category D. So for us, I circled it in yellow, 200 feet, half mile. Continuing on, ILS runway 22 right, put a big red X there. That is the NOTAM. The glide slope is out there, so this can only be used as a localizer. Again, approach category D gives us 410 feet, 3/4 mile visibility. Continuing on to the VOR approach for 4 left, again, category D. We don't have a GPS for easy fix identification, but we should still be able to identify pan or potentially have radar for this approach. If we go back to the localizer, we have this Zibes. It's kind of covered up by the circle, but that Zibes fix, we're assumed we can identify that for the localizer approach. So I'm going to assume we can identify pan for this VOR 4 left approach. So for that, it would be 551 feet, 1 3/4 mile visibility. All right, moving on. VOR DME runway 22 right. Again, assuming we can obtain our local altimeter, pretty simple, 410 feet, 1 1/4 mile visibility. All right, moving on to the next point, 2. What are the lowest legal 1 nav alternate weather minimums we can have for Baton Rouge? For 1 nav minimums, we add 400 feet to ceiling and 1 mile of visibility. So we got a few steps here. 1, list all approaches. We just looked at those. 2, select lowest approach after adding 400 feet and 1 mile. So here I have a picture of the math I did. Added 400 feet and 1 mile to each approach. The lowest one is ILS 13. Step 3, temporary forecast weather is forecast for 500 feet, 1 mile visibility. Again, for 3585, neglecting the temporary forecast, that would give us 3,000 feet, 6 mile visibility according to the main body of that TAF. So is Baton Rouge a legal alternate using 1 nav? No, if we use the tempo forecast. Yes, if the flight was dispatched under 3585. Moving on to number 3. What are the lowest legal 2 nav alternate weather minimums for Baton Rouge? Now again, for 2 nav, we add 200 foot to the ceiling and a 1/2 mile visibility to the higher of 2 approaches. That makes things a little more complicated, but we have it broken down into steps here. Step 1, verify at least 2 suitable approaches and 2 separate runways using 2 nav aids. Now again, like I said earlier, that could be opposite ends of 1 runway. As an example, 2 different ILSs with 2 separate identifiers. For this particular setup, we have approaches for different runways, so we'll look at those in a second. Again, we've listed all of our runways and our available approaches. Step 3, add 200 feet and a 1/2 mile visibility to that. You can see we did that here. Step 4, select 2 separate approaches or 2 lowest minimums. So out of our options here, we have a localizer 22 right and a VOR DME 22 right. Now, those both go to the same runway. We can't reuse 22, so we got to pick the better of those 2. I put a little red X here by 610 feet because that's a slightly higher ceiling than available for localizer 22 right. Now again, this is localizer because the ILS glide slope is in op. So out of our 2 lowest options, we have ILS 13 and localizer 22, 400 feet, 1 mile, 600 feet, 1 1/4 mile. We pick those 2, we select the highest of the 2, that gives us 600 feet, 1 1/4 mile, given to us by localizer 22 right. Now again, at our ETA of 1800 Zulu, the temporary forecast in the TAF is 1 statute mile visibility and broken ceilings at 500 feet. If we are flying under exemption 3585, the main body of the TAF forecasts 6 mile visibility and scattered ceilings at 3,000 feet. 2 nav weather minimums of 600 feet and 1 1/4 mile are higher than what is forecast. Now, at our ETA of 1800 Zulu, the temporary forecast is 1 statute mile visibility and broken ceilings at 500 feet. So 1 mile, 500 is less than what we can get from this localizer 22 approach. So unless we were dispatched under exemption 3585, allowing us to use the main body of the forecast of that TAF, which was 6 mile visibility and 3,000 feet broken ceilings, this would not be a good pick for an alternate again. Number 4, is it legal to use Baton Rouge as an alternate airport for our flight and why? Let's compare our 1 nav and 2 nav again and just kind of see which one is more favorable. Now, again, at our ETA of 1800 Zulu, The temporary forecast is 1 mile visibility, broken ceilings of 500. We've gone over that a few times. But our 1 nav weather minimums are higher than that, 600 feet, 1.5 mile visibility, which makes that illegal and not applicable to our use as an alternate. Looking at 2 nav, weather minimums of 600 feet, 1.25 mile. They're higher than what the forecast is making them, so again, this would be an illegal choice for an alternate. Now, out of the two, 1 nav should be more favorable due to the 1.5 statute mile visibility being closer to the 1 mile in the forecast. But let's take a closer look at if this flight was dispatched under exemption 3585 and see what we could do there. So with exemption 3585, again, I found this chart in chapter 4, page 1.4 of the Flight Operations Manual. And again, I have our TAF there in a yellow box. So if the main body is taken as valid, which forecasts 6 mile visibility and scattered ceilings at 3,000 feet, and the temporary of 500 and 1 mile is ignored, in the case of 1 nav and 2 nav, both show Baton Rouge would be a good alternate for us. Now, the main body of our TAF, if it's at or above minimums, but exemption 3585 says for first alternate requirements, the temporary must be at or above 1/2 the alternate minimums. The temporary TAF is 500 feet, 1 statute mile, which is still below our 1 nav, 600 feet, 1.5 mile, and 2 nav, 600 feet, 1.25 mile. So in both cases, Baton Rouge is not a good alternate under normal or 3585 dispatch procedures. Now let's look at our last thing. What if that glide slope was not affected by NOTAM? Now, going back and comparing all of our approaches, for 1 nav, we add 400 feet and 1 mile visibility. So comparing from the localizer to the ILS 22 right, that would increase up to 600 feet ceilings, 1 3/8 mile visibility. Now going down to 2 nav, if you did the ILS 22 right, you add 200 feet and 1/2 mile visibility. That would bring it up to 400 feet, 7/8 statute mile. Now we're getting somewhere. At our ETA of 1800 Zulu, the temporary forecast is, again, broken ceilings at 500 feet, 1 mile visibility. At 1 nav, our 600 feet, 1 3/8 statute mile is still above that forecast ceiling-wise, but it's still making it a no-go for runway visual range. It's not within limits. But if we look at 2 nav, 400 feet and 7/8 statute mile is below our temporary forecast of 500 feet, 1 mile visibility. So provided this NOTAM goes away, assuming the glide slope is fixed and we're able to use the 400 feet, 7/8 statute mile minimums, Baton Rouge could become a good legal alternate under the 2 nav requirements if the ILS 22 right is used to its full capability. That's all I have for you. Thanks for watching my presentation, and hope you enjoy the rest of the class.